You no doubt have heard by now that the entire world is united against Russia. What you may not be aware of is just how much of the world has turned its back on Bumblin Biden. In this video, we're going to take a look at what's really going on in this horrible Ukrainian conflict. We're going to discover precisely why more and more of the world is actually moving towards Russia and abandoning the liberal globalist order Biden and the neocons, and what it all ultimately means for the future of our world. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you. As always, I'm your daily fake news antidote, so come on into your Patriot Professor's den so I can help you to think better so you can feel better in these crazy and turbulent times. So also make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. Before we begin, make sure to click on that link below and support this channel by visiting our awesome merch store that has all kinds of t-shirts and swag for you and the patriots in your life. We got our awesome line of Let's Go Brandon t-shirts. I'm wearing mine today. We've also got some brand new Freedom Trucker shirts. We got rhino hunting shirts, you name it, all just by clicking on the link below. And I gotta tell you, gang, the most common feedback that I get from those of you who wear these shirts is how often random people are going to come up to you and give you super awesome compliments on your shirts when you're wearing them out in public. It's so wonderful. So your purchases, of course, are going to be spreading Patriot hope, but they're also going to be supporting this channel. So make sure to click on this link below or go to store.turleytalks.com. That's store.turleytalks.com. All right, let's dive right in here. We are now wrapping up the second week of the Ukrainian conflict. And in terms of the situation on the ground, Russian troop formations that you can see here in the red, they have clearly surrounded the Donbass region to the east, which contains upwards of 60,000, perhaps as many as 100,000 Ukrainian troops, which you can see in the blue oval shape there. And as you can see, Ukrainian troops, they're most especially the Azov battalion, which is the hardcore ethno-nationalist wing of Ukraine. They are basically surrounded in a Russian formation that's called the Cauldron. And the Cauldron functions to contain the enemy army, closing up any escape routes. And then what the Russians do over time is they slowly heat up the Cauldron with increasingly massive aerial bombardments, and they basically cook whatever is trapped inside. Now, the Russians do this in order to force the other side, in this case the Ukrainians, to the negotiating table so that Russia gets everything it wants. And Russian demands at this point, as I understand it, are absolutely non-negotiable. And, you know, I got to say, I was just listening to a podcast with my colleague Conrad Franz, who writes for our blog and our podcast. He pointed out that if you listen to the mainstream media, and particularly Fox News and Sean Hannity, I mean, you would think that Russia's just gone nuts. It's on some world conquest. They're taking all of Ukraine, and next they're going to invade Poland and then Hungary and reestablish the Soviet Union. And as Conrad pointed out, this is all absolutely insane from the very beginning of this conflict, and it is horrible, no question. But Russian officials have been absolutely clear about what they want. What are their goals in all this? They want a Ukraine committed to absolute neutrality with regard to NATO. NATO will never be allowed in Ukraine. And they want the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass region recognized as independent states, and Crimea officially recognized as a permanent part of Russia. As I understand, those are the non-negotiables for the Russians. Good, bad, ugly, whatever. And the Cauldron will continue to heat up until Ukraine eventually bends and cedes to these demands. Now, as all of this is going on, I have to say there is a rather bizarre propaganda campaign being waged by the Western media to make us think that things have never been better for us in the West. The world, we're told, is on our side. Everyone's behind Joe Biden on this. He's finally rehabilitated himself politically and reestablished himself as the leader of the free world, yada, yada, yada. But periodically, we do get glimpses of reality coming in for the mainstream media. There is the hesitant yet increasing realization that Russia is simply nowhere near as isolated as many pundits would have us believe. And we can actually see this for ourselves. Take a look at this map. The nations highlighted here are all the nations that are currently sanctioning Russia in some way, shape, or form. So as you can see, the sanctioned nations are comprised of the U.S. and Canada, the EU member nations. You got Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Singapore, Japan, Taiwan. However, you look at this map from a counter perspective. Look at the massive landmass of gray on here. Those are the nations that thus far refused to sanction Russia. And as you can see, their size is far more formidable than the sanctioning nations. So just there visually, we can see that the mainstream media propaganda that the whole world is united against Russia is absolutely absurd. And so is the notion of the supposed massive support for Joe Biden's leadership against Russia. In many respects, gang, it's the complete opposite. The world is in fact turning away from Biden, very much the way they did after the fall of Kabul. Take a look at this headline. The leaders of Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates reportedly just refused to take Biden's calls when he tried to reach out to them to pressure them to sanction Russia. Now, you've got to let this hit you. This is not a matter of Saudi Arabia and the UAE simply disagreeing with the United States or arguing or debating or anything like that. This is an official snub. It's their way of saying that when it comes to the crisis in Ukraine, what the United States thinks under Joe Biden is irrelevant. Now, keep in mind, this snub comes on the heels of Biden begging Saudi Arabia to increase their oil production and Saudi Arabia telling them to take a hike. They're refusing to increase their oil production, even after Biden pleaded with them to do it. Then, on top of all this, after the Biden administration announced their embargo of Russian oil, the EU announced that they're refusing to go along with it. They're not going to ban Russian oil. They frankly can't, gang. They're so dependent on it. But once again, it's another indication that even within the Western alliance, even within, Biden is getting snubbed. India has turned its back on Biden. Even though he did everything he possibly could to get them to sanction Russia over the last couple of weeks, India remains officially neutral. They're not going along with the sanctions. And while certainly the relationship between India and the United States has clearly been strained, with even Biden going so far as to actually publicly announce they were considering sanctioning India for their refusal to turn against Russia, that talk itself seems to have clearly died down. Again, India isn't budging. And Bumblin Biden has even backed off in his threat to send Polish MiG-29s into Ukraine, recognizing that that would indeed be the beginning of World War III. The General Secretary of NATO totally smacked down the idea. He stated in no uncertain terms, NATO is not going to do anything that could risk war breaking out between Russia and the West. And if you want to really know how bad things are for Biden, just look at who he just sent to try to stabilize the situation in Europe. None other than the queen of cringe herself, cackles Kamala. Ever since this conflict began, I've devoted myself absolutely to fulfilling my role as your fake news antidote by bringing to you what I believe to be really happening in the Ukraine crisis that goes way beyond the silly little clickbait headlines that pervade our ridiculous mainstream media. And what I have consistently argued is that what's unfolding before our eyes is nothing less than the rising of a new world. Whether anyone actually wants this world to rise is irrelevant. A new world is rising regardless. And it's a world that's been boiling beneath the surface for some time now. Scholars such as Sam Huntington predicted it with his Clash of Civilizations thesis in the 1990s. Before Huntington, Michel Mafusoli and his prediction that neo-tribalism would eventually redefine the world political order. I would argue directly the postmodern scholar Francois Lyotard recognized that the modern age, culminating in this rules-based neoliberal international order, was indeed coming to an end. And what we're seeing in Ukraine are the birth pangs, as it were, of the rise of that new world. This is a world that is totally unencumbered by the norms of neoliberal international order. It cares nothing about what Western media pundits have to say. It cares nothing about economic sanctions or the international or anything like that. That's all part of a dying liberal order that was authoritatively enforced by the U.S. and the EU. That world has come to an end. Biden appears to be completely clueless to this. The EU appears completely clueless to this. And so they're wasting their time with all of this online outrage used to justify the canceling of an entire culture, an entire nation, an entire civilization. But what doesn't seem to cross their minds is that that civilization is in point of fact engaged in canceling them. This is exactly what Russia is saying openly and explicitly. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov just today said this at a press conference in Turkey, quote, "I assure you, we will overcome adversity and we will do everything to no longer depend on the West in any strategic sectors of our life that are of decisive importance for our people." A more clear declaration of emancipation from the West and the neoliberal order could not be stated. Think about it. Russia has basically doubled its population in a matter of a week. When you bring in all the former Tsarist or Soviet satellite nations, in addition to Ukraine and Belarus, and of course in the Eurasian theater, so we're talking Georgia, Kazakhstan, Azerbaijan, Turkmenistan, Armenia, none of whom are sanctioning Russia. When you bring in all those nations into Moscow's sphere of influence, as they are, the new Russosphere is now 300 million strong. It's turning decisively to China and India and Pakistan and Iran as representatives of a thoroughly non-Western world that's representing nearly 80% of the world's population. That is the new world that's rising. And all the online outrage, all the yellow and blue flags on lapel pins and Facebook cover photos, however well-meaning they are, they're not going to change that in the slightest. Is it any wonder that Saudi Arabia isn't returning Biden's phone calls? What's needed at this hour is a Western leadership that recognizes that the days of liberal globalism are over and that they're going to have to design a new comprehensive geopolitics that's able to effectively navigate an increasingly post-globalist world. Until then, don't be surprised if Biden's phone calls continue to go unanswered. Now, before you go, you will definitely want to check out my latest video I just uploaded on the bombshell revelation that there are indeed U.S.-funded biolabs in Ukraine. It's astonishing for sure. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.